Welcome to International Regulatory Frameworks for Climate Change and Environmental Management. I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of the traditional owners of this land, elders past and present, and future generations on which we hold this land in trust. So this is the first of 12 lectures in our course, and I hope you're really going to enjoy this course. I love delivering it. I hope you'll really love it as well and get a lot from it. So in this first lecture, I'm going to cover three things. Introduction to the course, who am I, who are you, and the course profile. I'm actually going to spend quite a bit of time on that introduction because what I want to do is try and paint a big picture about a whole range of issues that are relevant and set the context for our course. So, and talk with you about that overall context. So it's only got one line there in the outline, but we'll spend the next hour or so on it. And jumping right into that, I'd like to step out a long way, out to the moon. So this is a beautiful picture taken in 1968 by an astronaut on the Apollo 8 mission. And it's very famous, it's called Earthrise. And it was taken when, almost by chance, the astronauts were on the surface of the moon and Earth came up over the horizon, and they snapped some pictures of it. So Earthrise is what it's called. And it's so beautiful, isn't it? You see our planet there in the blackness of space, and I just love it. And you'll see it, I'll use it as the first slide in each lecture, and it's also the theme if you see it on the Blackboard site and the like. And I love it in so many ways, but particularly for our course, the beauty as well as the physical nature of what we are dealing with in this course, I think is really epitomised in this image. This is another image that's also very famous. It's called the Blue Marble. It was taken on a later Apollo mission in 1972, and it's one of the most reproduced images in all of photography history. It was extensively reproduced, particularly for atlases and the like, in the 70s and 80s. Like I'm actually born in 1972, way back when we used to use stone chisels at school. We'd chip away and the dinosaurs roamed. You had to watch out when you went outside because you might get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. So way back in the dark ages, this was on a lot of atlases. So I remember it on my little junior atlas at primary school. And it was used extensively because it was one of the first images to capture the Earth without any shadow. So the sun was behind the spacecraft when this image was taken. So you see there's no shadow. And it's amazingly beautiful as well. You can see Antarctica down at the bottom and Africa and all those massive storms swirling across the Southern Ocean. So if we step in closer again, another very famous image taken from the International Space Station in 2003. It shows the sun setting over the Western Pacific. So there's millions of people down beneath those clouds. In fact, probably most of us, if you were in the Western Pacific in 2003, then you're somewhere down beneath those clouds. And you can see that huge cumulonimbus cloud sort of in the middle, top left. So it would have been a huge storm system affecting the planet down beneath it. And you can see that little blue line of, see the blue on the horizon? That little smudge, which we'll talk about particularly when we talk about ozone. So that little smudge of our atmosphere, or it's actually just, so we'll talk about it in the ozone lecture, but the clouds are all beneath 11 or 12 kilometres in height in the atmosphere, so really close to the surface. And then that little blue smudge is just above the layer that separates the troposphere from the layers above it. And that little blue smudge is pretty well equivalent with where the ozone layer is, so a concentration of ozone that stops ultraviolet light reaching our planet. And then above that there's other layers of the atmosphere that you can't really see, but it goes out for a few hundred kilometres. Now that small smudge, Carl Sagan once said, if you took an orange and painted it with varnish. So imagine that orange in your hand, a little bit sticky. The thickness of the varnish to the orange is about the same thickness as our atmosphere is to our planet. So incredibly thin relative to our planet, but obviously essential for life. We live in the atmosphere. It is crucial for every aspect of life on our planet, and yet incredibly small relative to our planet. Okay, our world without borders can be viewed from many perspectives, and I'm sure everyone's played on Google Earth. You know, you can scan out on Google Earth and spin the globe around. I remember when Google Earth first came out. I remember doing that. I thought it was really cool. You could zip around the world really quickly, and okay, so we're really used to doing that now. But we're also very used to seeing the world with borders. So physically, borders don't exist. Well, except if you're Donald Trump and you're building a massive wall, then you can build a physical border. But you know, normally you don't get to the border between one country and another, and there's like this black dotted line painted on the ground. The lines that we construct for borders are artificial, and yet they're also central to how we govern, how we manage our society. And this is just some beautiful side images. I'm sure everyone's seen these images of lights across the planet. So we've got a really international course. So who here, so this is Asia at night, so who here would have been somewhere in, let's just say it was taken, I think it was taken about 2012, but who here would be normally residing beneath one of those lights in that picture? So if you're from China, from anywhere in Asia, lots of Australians. North America, so anyone would have been beneath these lights if they're taken a few years ago? No one from North America? South America, yo, hola. And then Europe and Africa, anyone beneath these lights if they're taken a few years ago? I'm sure we'll have some people in our course from Africa particularly, and maybe a few from Europe. Okay, this is another beautiful image from the space station showing actually the Straits of Gibraltar from about 400 kilometres above the Earth. So all those lights. And this is just an image I threw in because it's beautiful and just showing the relief across Australia. So if we come down to the surface, this is a picture I took a couple of years ago on North Stradbroke Island. So my eldest daughter was playing in the water, and I just snapped this image, which I really like. So a really beautiful place. And we can look back up, out to the stars, and we're surrounded by incredible beauty. So this is a picture that a past student in this course took on the trip to Springbrook. And we've got these truly awesome species. So this is, if that's not the coolest frog ever, it would have to be up there in the top 3. And we've got incredibly beautiful places. Has anyone been to Ha Long Bay in Vietnam? From South America, and you've been to Ha Long Bay. Wow, jealous. Okay, we've got a world with lots of amazing people. So I'm guessing, I just looked for an image of a crowd, and I'm guessing that this was some music festival in Canada, given the big flag flying there. And we've got lots and lots and lots of people. So there's this cool website called Worldometer, which gives real world time statistics. You can go there and you just see the clock on current human population just going up. So that, I just grabbed a screen grab of it yesterday. So currently 7.5 billion people and going up. And if you see their births this year, 127 million, and deaths 52 million. So net population growth this year, 74 million, nearly 75 million. And we've got a world filled with truly courageous people. So this is an image of Malala, who was I'm sure everyone knows her story. When she was 16, she was a campaigner in Pakistan for girls' education. And she was shot in the face by the Taliban, and then evacuated to the UK, where she now lives, and she won the International Peace Prize the year before last, was it? So incredibly courageous young lady. And we've got an amazing human history, including in Australia. There's a couple of images I just wanted to highlight from the last couple of years with the incredible increase in our knowledge of human settlement, human life in Australia. So this cave was reported in 2016 in Nature. You can see some of the traditional owners there. And I'll just tell you the story. So there were archaeologists out with an Aboriginal elder in the traditional countries of the elder, and they needed to take a toilet stop, and the elder walked up a dry creek and he noticed this cave up out of the dry creek, and they went up there, and it's resulted in an incredible record of human settlement in that area, taking the earliest known occupation of that area back to 49,000 years. And it was discovered by chance. It had been lost to the traditional owners of the country, and was only refound by chance and just reported in Nature. And then just this year, in July, was also reported in, I think it was Nature, this rock shelter in the Northern Territory, which has been dated back to 65,000 years. Incredible. So it took back, this is just this year, just a few months ago it was reported, it had obviously been studied for a few years, but taking back known human occupation of Australia back by 18,000 years from what was previously, had previously been established, Aboriginal people had been in Australia. So incredible, and just so recent. And we have amazing culture around the world, so the Great Wall of China, and ongoing culture. So here's an image of Rio's Carnival. So many of us live in mega cities. So does anyone know what this city is? I've tried to find it. It's just an image, but it could either be New York, it might be London. Does anyone recognise any of the buildings? Or maybe, I think it might be New York, given that sort of, see down the bottom, that sort of style of tiered building seems to be more a US style than others. Anyway, big city, let's just say it's New York, mega cities. And many people live in really densely populated places. So this is Hong Kong, the most densely populated place on earth. Average of 130,000 people packed into each square kilometre. So UQ is about 1 kilometre across. So just on a normal day at UQ, you'd have 20,000 people here. Imagine just like multiplying that by 5 or 6 times, you'd have just people packed in on top of each other. And some cities have grown incredibly quickly in recent decades. So this is, I like this image, it's of Shenzhen in China. And up in the top right-hand corner, there's an image in black and white of it taken in 1980. So you notice in that black and white image, there's no high-rises. It was just essentially a pretty sleepy fishing village. And then in the last, after 1980 up to 2006, it just grew to massive skyscrapers and has become an incredible industrial hub and a massive port for exports from China. So incredibly rapid growth. And within that, there's some societies that are really rich and have a fantastic standard of living. So this is an image, obviously, of Brisbane. So we live in this incredible city that's, you're generally safe to walk down the streets, relatively low crime. You switch on the lights, they come on, you can drink the water. It's an incredible lifestyle. In contrast, some communities are really poor. I think this is the Philippines. I'm not 100% certain, but I think it's the Philippines. Here's Mumbai in India. And I keep going to say favelas, but that's Portuguese for shanties. But here's Mumbai and the slums in Mumbai. And here's an image from Bangladesh of kids living in, obviously abject poverty. They can't drink from the canal because of the industrial waste, and there's concerns in this area. This was a story about the concerns about contamination of their groundwater, which the people to use to drink from. People want jobs, so a lot of factories with people working for incredibly low wages but still working. And we've also changed the world a huge amount. So this is a copper mine in Canada. And some places are heavily polluted. So an image of Beijing. And this, I always thought this was an amazing picture from 2013, where you can't see the buildings in the distance from the smog. And not just in China, Indonesia, from a couple of years ago with forest fires in surrounding areas. So incredible pollution. And just recently, you might have seen in the news, I mean, it's regularly been in the news for the last decade, the pollution in Delhi in India. But in the last few months, it's been at catastrophic levels, or acute levels might be a better description. So described as a gas chamber. This is just from the 9th of November images. And this was I just grabbed this little bit of a story from earlier this month. New Delhi has announced a ban on lorries after high levels of air pollution triggered a public health emergency earlier this week. The Indian capital was cloaked in thick smog, forcing thousands of schools to close. Levels of PM 2.5 pollutants, which are the really small ones, have hit 1,000 milligrams this week, according to reports. To put this in context, 300 milligrams is considered a highly dangerous amount. Current pollution levels in the city are 30 times higher than the World Health Organization considers safe. The situation as it exists today is the worst I've seen it in my 35 years staying in the city, a lung surgeon said. As a doctor, I have no problem saying the situation today is a public health emergency. If you want to protect people, you should be ordering the evacuation of Delhi, closing down all schools, closing down all offices. That's, of a massive city, and you're saying close it down. And that's happening now. And then just today, I was on ABC. If you go there now, I think it's probably still there. It's, I think, a story that's going to be on Foreign Correspondent either tonight or this week's Foreign Correspondent, is about nuclear waste in the Pacific. And this dome, which looks, the setting looks beautiful, doesn't it? It's this little coral atoll in the Marshall Islands. And that dome is basically where the US in the 40s and 50s conducted 46 nuclear tests in the area, Bikini Atoll and the like. See the blue hole that you see a little bit further than the dome? That's the crater of one of the nuclear tests. The dome was also another crater, and they considered it too expensive to line it with concrete. So all they did was basically push all of the nuclear debris, highly radioactive nuclear debris, into this crater, and then just basically covered over concrete over the top. So it's in connection with surrounding groundwater, and it's also cracked on top, according to the report. So you've just got basically seawater moving in and out of it. Around a few kilometres away from this atoll, there's a few hundred people live on another island. This part of the atoll is supposed to be a no-go area because of the high levels of radiation. They're also not supposed to eat the fish, so you're not supposed to be eating the fish from the surrounding coral reefs, and that's there was in the news report, it talks about a 2013 report from the US government saying that it's leaking now and could collapse if it was hit by a severe hurricane, the whole thing could go. And that would be not just an issue for the island, but for the whole of the Pacific. So we're dealing with the legacy of waste from decades ago, and it's an ongoing massive management issue. So highly contaminated waste, deemed too expensive to line the bottom. Incredible decision. Some permeable, would it be sand? And it's leaking. And it's also threatened by rising sea levels due to climate change, just to throw in another issue with it. Okay, so that's a relatively small community, but that's vulnerable to change. But this is an amazing image, isn't it? Has anyone been to the Maldives? So south of India, island nation. This is its capital. And yeah, you don't have to just look at that and you think, well, where's the high ground? You can see why the Maldives is one of the most active nations fighting for action on climate change, because their very survival as a nation depends on it. Image from the US, flooding in 2012, and other changes being massive events of coral bleaching, so 2015, 2016 coral bleaching event, driven by rises in mean global temperatures and then spikes associated with the El Nino. There's been three major coral bleaching events, one in 97, 98, one in 2002, 2003, and the latest one in 2015, 2016. And this is just showing the 97 heat in the El Nino event in comparison to the 2015 El Nino event building up. And this is a before and after image of from the Pacific, of a coral reef on the left before the bleaching, on the right after the bleaching. And yeah, the 2016 bleaching event for the Great Barrier Reef, so very recent, described by a UQ researcher, Justin Marshall, really great researcher on coral reefs. He described it as Australia's biggest ever environmental disaster. Biggest ever. And last year crushed the global heat record, just crushed it, so last year was 2016. It crushed 2015, which had crushed the previous record. So you can see 2015 is the second last black dot, and then 2016 was the next, and they were massive jumps above mean global temperature that had been previously recorded. And this year we're on track for the second or third hottest, and this is a year without an El Nino event as well. So there's you see the little green bars are where the 2017, obviously we've got a month to go with 2017, but it's going to be somewhere within those bars. And increasing temperatures aren't uniform, so we've got polar amplification, so a lot of the heat is across the Arctic, and then there's patches. So this is from October 2016, and just an image that really brings that home. So this is a massive heat wave over the Arctic in November last year. So basically this time last year, temperatures in the Arctic were about 20 degrees above average. 20 degrees, it's just like off the scale in terms of it was last year, I think it was just about at freezing levels, just about at zero, which for the Arctic at that time of year is incredibly hot. So ice wasn't reforming because it was essentially at just a melting point. Okay, and in that context, we've got international regulation. So the Paris Agreement 2015, we're going to talk about on Thursday, Friday. Massively important. But apart from international agreements, we also do a lot of horrible things to each other. We spend a lot of money killing each other or preparing to kill each other. So the graph on the right shows US spending back a few years ago was $700 billion. And you compare it to any other country, and I think it was like 15 countries all stacked up don't equal what the US spends on its military. So huge amount of spending and incredible suffering caused by that. So I know this is a horrible image, but this is a young child that had been hit by a bomb in 2014 in the war in Gaza. And it causes incredible suffering also causes incredible bitterness and divisions within our society. So this was a story that really struck a chord with me at the time of that was Sam de Brito, who passed away sadly a little while after writing this. He said, if a rocket blew my child to pieces in a bed, I would devote my life to revenge. If 200 Australian children had been torn apart by missiles in their homes, playing on beaches, huddled in schools, this country would be on a war footing. And then it goes on about Israel. But it's completely true. If someone dropped a bomb on Australia and 200 kids were killed, we would be at war. And yet that's happening, and the international community is basically turning away and not holding, the country that's doing it to account. Okay, apart from war, lots of communities have incredible crime. So this is what looks like the army, but it's actually police, heavily armed police, going into action in Rio de Janeiro, in many of the favelas, the slums, shanty towns, where crime gangs basically rule. The police can't go into without basically going in armoured vehicles with a lot of weapons. And we've also entered this grim period for international diplomacy. Got a few descriptors for Donald Trump. So, a grim period for climate policy and international relations with president, narcissist, egomaniac, liar, vile sexual predator, bully, conman, and climate denier, Donald Trump. Had to think carefully about if I was doing him justice with all of those words. I've chosen each one of them specifically because I think that they're very apt. Last year, one student was in feedback about this course didn't like the fact that I criticised Donald Trump, and I thought about that, and I thought, well, my expectation is all you guys are really smart. You're here to think, and you'll make your own decisions. So I'm not trying to indoctrinate you with an agenda. I'm going to tell you what I think, because politics is such an important part of international policy. And the personalities of leaders have a huge impact. It's so obvious right now with what's happening in the US and its effect around the globe in international relations. So if we ignore that, we ignore the elephant in the room, this huge issue. So we can't. But you make your own decisions. If you're a Trump supporter, okay, I'm happy to debate any issue, but I chose each word there because I just think he's vile and repulsive and a blight on our society. Yep.
But he was voted by the American public.
He was voted, yep, which brings me to another point. Great segue. So a major theme of this course is understanding historic and political context of international regulation. So we're going to be looking at these major treaties in their historical and political context, and basically coming up to now and then thinking about the future, where your careers are going to be. So the politics of now is relevant. Trump's presidency, he was elected, but it's going to end either after one term or after two. It will end at some point. And having lived through the second Bush administration, I couldn't believe they voted him in a second time, but they did. So I'm resigned to the fact that Trump might be there for a second term of presidency.
I just have a big question. I don't really understand politics at all. I have a real hard time voting. I have no idea. But the fact that we've seen 5 prime ministers in 5 years, is that something that can actually happen in America, or are they structured?
So great question. We've had multiple different leaders, prime ministers, in the last 5 years. Generally not in the US. The leaders are voted in for a set term, so he can't call an early election. They're set terms, and he's there unless impeached or he resigns. So he can't be voted out by anyone, even his own party. So no one can sack him except, well, Congress if they impeach him. But with Republicans controlling both houses of Congress, there's no way there's going to be impeachment, at least until next year, when there's midterm elections in the US. And if the two houses of Congress change from controlled by his party, the Republicans, to controlled by the Democrats. It's a long shot, but if it does happen, he's going to be in a world of pain. Just like Obama was after his first midterm elections, and he brought in healthcare, and the Republicans then gained control of at least the lower house, if not the lower house of reps, and then caused him a world of pain. They launch a whole heap of inquiries. They try and create problems for the president. So Trump doesn't have that at the moment. Simple answer is he's there at least for his first term, unless he's impeached or he resigns. Cool. Okay, it's going to end at some point. But I also think that there's important, enduring lessons about his elections for the future. And I've thought a lot about this in thinking about this lecture and this course in the last year. Because, what do we make? What sense do we make of it when, we've got this, we like to think that our society is just advancing. So we're always going forward. We're always getting better. Technology, human society, always getting better. And then we have, things like the September 11 attacks, the terrorist attacks. And then we also elect people like Donald Trump. So there's these huge events that aren't advances. What do we make of them? And the context, just looking at what some people are saying, which I thought was really apt. So this was by a political strategist, a Democratic political strategist, writing a month ago. Trump won the 2016 US a presidential election because he consolidated the growing number of angry voters who felt let down by the people and institutions controlling power in the country. I think that's a really important and insightful comment. People are angry. They're angry at governments, and they're voting basically to throw out what's there. The problem that I see with that is that, what was it, that famous quote about, for every complicated problem, there's a simple answer that is wrong. So we've got a lot of problems in the world right now. A lot of problems with governments, a lot of problems in government, internationally and nationally. No one denies that. But do you solve them by just throwing out what we've got and starting again? If you think that's the answer, the next question is, what do you replace it with? Like, for all of the problems that, say, there are with the United Nations, what do you replace it with? If you could just wave a magic wand and somehow, recreate a different system, how would you do it so that it actually produced benefit for humanity, better than what we've got? I don't think you can answer that. And that's the huge problem with throwing out the governments that we've got, is that we're not actually replacing them with anything constructive. We're replacing them with destruction. So Trump is working the hidden veins of fear, racism and resentment, which lie deep in Middle America. I will try and say the United States of America, because I remember some Latin American students years ago pulling me up and saying, really don't like it when you refer to the United States of America as America, because America is actually really big and includes Latin America as well. So, Middle United States of America. Respect for the past, distrust of the future, and politics of againstness. This is an interesting quote because it's actually quoting, the bit that's in quotes is from a 1970 report from the US National Committee for an Effective Congress. So it wasn't written about Trump, but it really reflects his why he was elected. And also in that context, we've got last year's Brexit vote, so the United Kingdom leaving the European Union. And sure, you might say the European Union had problems, has very significant problems, but from the UK's perspective, is being alone better than being part of that larger body? And the Leave campaign was very much driven by similar politics of fear, anger, and resentment. So that's a reality that we need to deal with. The politics of fear, anger, and resentment are embedded, and I've emphasised and underlined embedded. We're not getting rid of them. We're not going to magically, wave a magic wand and poof, suddenly we all agree. And people are happy, and people aren't going to vote for political parties like, or people like Donald Trump. It ain't going to happen. So how do we, as people who are wanting to make a positive change, doing degrees in environmental management or international politics, whatever your degree is, in your career, how do you work in that overall environment? Because you have to. This is our reality. We can't escape it, and we have to recognise it and try and address it. And we can't just think we're going to create perfect international frameworks and they will solve problems that can't be solved internationally and can't even be solved nationally because they're embedded. I thought a lot about this, and I created this slide because again, thinking about, you can get caught up in the politics of fear and resentment. And I thought a lot about this because I've come from a background in 20 years in working in environmental law and policy, and you particularly I think when you're at university and in your undergraduate degree and you're learning all of these detailed things, you think you can, that our society is really, like policy, for instance, you might think is actually driven by science, that we, our pollution controls, our energy system is at the cutting edge. It's the best we can create based on our technologically driven. But the reality is it isn't. Logic, reason, and information play only a limited role in public policy. A great deal of politics, and therefore public policy, is driven by public feelings of, and I've put contrasts here, so hope and fear, dreams and anger, compassion and resentment. And there's a whole mixture of those things. What do you guys think of that as an idea? I know you're smart, and I know that you already think about these things. So what do you think of that as a statement and then those components? And do you think there's anything that's missing there? So I'll go on. Fear, anger, and resentment dominate the US at present. This was another statement just recently by a fellow who wrote a book in 2009 about polarisation and authoritarianism in the United States of American politics. We aren't policy experts, all we know is we hate the other guy. And in that context, providing more information, so this is that graph that I just put up before about climate change and the mean temperature rise. We've just got all of this scientists out there. I'm not full-time any longer with the School of Earth and Environmental Scientists, but I often would see my colleagues, so I work with a lot of scientific colleagues for the last decade, and there's all of these great researchers going out and measuring a whole range of environmental parameters, particularly around climate change. A lot of coral reef scientists, people going off to Antarctica, people studying all these different biomes. And I admire them, but I also think, what's the fucking point? Because all of this data, we're drowning in data. We are drowning in it, and it isn't changing public policy. It doesn't matter that we are recording more and more temperature rise, that we have checked the global temperature record so many times. Tens of thousands of scientists work in this area, and this is the best data we've got. It doesn't change the majority of public opinion. So providing more information and data, it isn't going to solve this. I'll just wrap up this little section though with a quote from Al Gore. I really love Al Gore's positive approach to climate policy after all he's been through. Political will is a renewable resource. he says, and I think it's a really apt thing. You know, when you look at like the United States of America at the moment with President Trump, the politics of anger and fear and resentment dominating, our countries have this incredible ability to regenerate. You know, the United States came back from the bleak days under the second Bush administration when it was, you know, international community really turned away from the US largely. And then under Obama, it was embraced again. So the US has an incredible ability to renew itself. It's got incredible people. And hopefully they will rejoin the international effort to deal with climate change in the future. It isn't happening now, but we shouldn't despair with the current state because it won't last. So future changes, both good and bad, are inevitable, and success isn't guaranteed or enduring. There's no endpoint also with all the policies we're talking about. So we're talking about, and one of the things I want to do with this course is, as I said, we're looking at international treaties from 1945 up to the present, and I want to tell you the story of how that we come to be at the point we're at. But it's very much a story that we're in the middle of now. You're an actor in. You know, you're in your career, you may work for government, you might work in policy, you might go and participate in international negotiations. You also might be just working at a domestic level in a role that's, say, you know, we've got people working in renewable energy now. So I've got a couple of people I've seen on the Blackboard work in renewable energy now. Anyone? Well, okay, on the Blackboard site we've had a few people say, you know, they're working in the renewable energy sector. Those people are very much implementing the solutions to climate change right now. And so even though they're not engaged in international negotiations, they're very much actors in the international effort to address these global problems. You know, if you work in, say, biodiversity conservation, you might be looking at the, you know, Convention on Biological Diversity very much, but if you're implementing a conservation program, you're part of the international effort to implement those international treaties and conserve biodiversity. So a lot of work that you will do in your careers is doing things that have an international component, even if you don't see that on a day-to-day level. So there's no end point. Success is not guaranteed. We haven't got a guarantee of a safe, prosperous society. And we have to work in the reality of the world around us, not some abstract theory of a utopia, a perfect world where international and national policies are perfect and enduring. This is very much I want to really emphasize that for our course. You know, we don't live in the abstract theory, we live in reality. And you have to balance realism with hope for the future. So will China emerge as the global climate leader in the wake of Trump's election? Open question. So obviously China right now is trying to position itself both because it's dealing domestically with incredible pressures of its own pollution and the incredible domestic pressure that creates from its own people for change. Now obviously China isn't a democracy, but think about it, if you were a party that had come to power from a revolution, it makes a lot of sense to pay attention to what people are saying to you. So even though there's not elections, there is a huge amount of public pressure in China to deal with pollution. So there's a huge domestic political pressure to deal with it. There's also what China clearly sees as the economic potential of positioning itself as the energy superpower. So manufacturing, driving, economic development in China built around manufacturing cheap solar panels, cheap wind turbines, cheap renewable energy to the rest of the world. So there's the twin domestic pressure and economic. It's not just this utopian, China's going to be nice and going to come and save the world. There's obvious reasons why China might do that. Yeah, good question. For someone who doesn't know anything about politics.
Oh, I don't know. I don't really.
I'm only teasing. Come on.
There's so much noise. I can't.
Yeah.
Isn't there something about the US dollar being backed by oil is sort of moving to the Chinese? I don't even know what currency they're trying to do, backed by gold. So wouldn't there be a push from China to move away from that US dollar backed by oil? us sort of moving into?
I haven't heard that idea. I'm more looking at the obvious like China has a huge pollution problem in its major cities. There is an obvious economic opportunity to with renewables. So even though China right now uses a huge amount of coal, there's obvious reasons. What I'm trying to emphasize is I don't want to be US centric. Obviously, it's a huge player internationally. China and Europe are also massive players, and there are causes for optimism. And I just wanted to highlight, for purposes of introduction, this open question. I've looked at Chinese policies in the past. I remember writing an article on the website The Conversation, looking at China a few years ago had made environmental protection one of the 5 pillars of its economy. And I said, look, that was a really good idea and Australia could learn from that. And I remember the comment section where a lot of people who lived in China saying, you're just a foreigner who's got no idea. The real politics in China are very different. The government talks about achieving all these things and it doesn't really. And true, I'm not a Chinese expert. I was simply looking at the national policies. But if a government there's obvious domestic political pressure to deal with these issues, and the government is saying it will devote a huge amount of money to it, that's going to have an effect. It might not achieve everything they say, it certainly probably won't, but it's a cause for optimism. Okay, the world needs China's ongoing leadership on climate is also a point that I want to emphasise. So China isn't a threat on climate. It's also this huge potential force for good. Okay, so what does the future hold? I want to focus on climate. So looking to the future, we're here right now. So a few things we know pretty clearly are going to happen. We're going to expect, for instance, ongoing dramatic loss of Arctic ice. So this is the extent of sea ice in October from 1979 to this year. So you can see a pretty obvious trend going down. So from about 9.5 million square kilometres to about 6.5 as of this month. So about 30% loss. And just to put that in context, you've got that this was August 2012, so the actual extent of ice is shown obviously in white, and then the average extent of ice at that time is shown in the line. So you've got this huge change. So what does that change? If we lose all the Arctic sea ice, bad for penguins and polar bears, but what does it matter to us? What do you think will be the effect on the globe if we lose Arctic sea ice within our lifetimes? Maybe in the next decade or two, but certainly within our lifetimes.
Increasing the sea level?
Increasing sea level? Not really, because the Arctic floats, and so it's more Greenland and the Antarctica, which have land-based ice. They're the real threats. But it's basically like an ice cube, so when you've got a glass with ice in it and the ice melts, it doesn't really change the level in the drink. So sea level from the Arctic directly isn't the issue, but if to the extent it affects Greenland, it is a huge issue, because I think if Greenland melts, it will raise global sea levels by about 3 metres. So, yep.
Yep. Kind of fighting in the UN for rights to that, so it's an economic thing. Russia's also moving military into that area.
Yep, so great point. Shipping routes, opening up more oil and gas reserves, just what we need. Burn more fossil fuels, make it go quicker.
So it changes the temperature in the northern hemisphere and stuff.
Yep. Great, is that the point, sorry, what point you were going to make?
I said, doesn't loss of ice means that more heat is absorbed, so you lose any ice.
Fantastic. Okay, so I want to give this comparison. Okay, so I'm bald. So there's one one other and amongst us who are bald. So, okay, now most of you guys aren't going to go bald. But can I just tell you to really appreciate your hair? You don't really think about how cool your hair is, okay? It's only well, it is a significant part of you being on your head, but if you think about it in terms of your total body area, your hair is relatively very small. But if you shaved your head and you walked outside in the sun, you would feel the difference immediately, because your hair is this lovely insulating solar guard. Okay, so you walk outside, even if you don't have a hat on, it's not that hot. Okay, if you're bald or you've shaved your head, it hurts, and you will always wear a hat, because your hair actually makes a huge difference, even though it's only a small part of you. So when we lose the Arctic, and we're going to lose the Arctic sea ice, it looks absolutely certain. Whatever we do now, it's on a trajectory where it's going to be gone within our lifetimes. It's basically like we've shaved the head of our planet, because when the northern hemisphere summer occurs and the Arctic points towards the sun, there's a huge amount of sunlight which is now, instead of being reflected back out into space when it hits the ice and basically bounces back out, it's been absorbed into the ocean. So it's a huge change in the energy input to our planet. Huge change that's then absorbed into the ocean and then has to be lost in some way. So we have to, thermodynamically, the world has to lose as much heat as it gains from the sun, otherwise we would just keep heating up. So the amount of energy is coming in has got to be lost, but it's lost in a different way. Instead of just reflecting back out as sunlight, it's now got to get back out as heat. And it creates a huge bubble around the Arctic. So there's a lot of land in Russia and in Canada that's under permafrost, which is also going to be heated up. Greenland is going to be heated up as well. So just think about these sort of heat rings coming out. It's not just losing ice that's just pretty for, great for polar bears to go hunting on. It actually is going to have a huge change on the whole of the northern hemisphere and also on the whole of our planet in terms of weather, but overall energy balance. The implications are enormous, absolutely enormous. And that is going to happen. We pretty clearly can't stop the Arctic being lost at this point. So this is I won't play, it's a little 30-second clip. If you want to, you can go and click on the link in the slides. But it shows the volume, so the area of sea ice is one thing. But something that researchers are pointing out is that the area isn't the only thing, it's the total volume of sea ice. So most of the sea ice now is very thin rather than meters thick. So the total volume has collapsed from 1979, nearly 17,000 cubic kilometres, down to 4,500 cubic kilometres this year. So you've got this massively smaller amount of ice. It's collapsing, and it's clearly going to go within the next few decades. And in that context, so that's where we're at now. We've got incredible changes that are going to have profound effects on the whole of the planet that we can't stop. And in that context, we are also making decisions about the future we want, because even though there's changes we can't stop, we can still make a difference to other impacts. And so I'll come back to this when we talk about climate change. But this is a graph showing atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide, and the current modelling for climate models is based around what are called representative carbon pathways, or RCPs. So RCP 8.5 is where we burn all of our fossil fuels, and carbon dioxide concentrations just basically go through the roof from current levels around 400 parts per million to well over 1,000 parts per million within a century. The RCP 3 is where we don't follow that future and we basically keep most of the fossil fuels in the ground. And just taking those two ends of the spectrum, this is the expected changes in surface temperature. Notice this is going out for hundreds of years, so it's the changes will be profound and will be long term. But on RCP 8.5, we expect really by 2100 mean global temperature rise is around 4 degrees, going up to something over 8 or maybe over 10 degrees within a century after that. And then if we don't burn all the fossil fuels, then we have a chance of keeping beneath 2 degrees. So on planned policies, rising fossil energy use will lead to irreversible and potentially catastrophic climate change. We're on an even more dangerous track to an increase of 6 degrees. So that was a 2011 International Energy Agency report. And 2012, the world is barreling down a path to heat up by 4 degrees at the end of the century if the global community fails to act on climate change. And you might say, hey, that's like 2011, 2012, you know, what about the Paris Agreement? The Paris Agreement occurs in this context and hasn't dramatically changed course. Hansen, one of the world's greatest climate scientists, has argued that preservation of a climate resembling that to which humanity is accustomed requires that most remaining fossil fuel carbon is never emitted to the atmosphere. And this is a graph, again, I'll come back to when we talk about climate change, but the blue line represents the mean global temperature for the last 12,000 years. And then the red, then you can see it kick up, and then the red is where we're going in the next century or so. So why is the blue line so significant? What's significant for the last 12,000 years for humanity?
That's when civilization formed. With
Bingo.
rocks and
Civilization as we know it has basically come about in the last 12,000 years of stable climate. So that's when essentially people started farming. When you think about ancient civilizations that built things that we can still see, it's really the last 6,000 to 8,000 years. So the pyramids, 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, Great Wall of China, last 1,000 to 2,000 years. So that's only the last few thousand years, and it's that period of stable climate where we came out of the last ice age. So I mentioned before, Aboriginal Australians were in Australia from about 65,000 years ago. So we had, obviously, humanity. Does anyone know, by the way, how long humans have been around for? Just to set this in context. How long has our species been on the planet? Hands up the Homo sapiens amongst us. Us, as a species. How long have we been here? So Aboriginal Australians have been in Australia for 65,000 years. How long has our species been on the planet? Okay, that's $1 million question for today. I want someone to be able to answer that by the end of the day. Okay, I'll say it isn't too far back, but the last 12,000 years have been particularly important for human civilization. And we are going, way out of that range. So this is a graph showing by 2100, if we don't take action on climate change and just keep burning fossil fuels as we're currently doing, we expect mean global temperature rise of about 4 degrees. The green is if we take radical action, keep most fossil fuels in the ground, we may be able to hold temperature rises to 2. The red is where current commitments are in terms of when we talk about climate change and the Paris Agreement. The countries have set targets of keeping global temperature rises beneath 2 degrees, if possible beneath 1.5 degrees, but current nationally determined contributions don't add up to that. They actually add up to way more, about 3.5 degrees rise by 2100. So even though we've got the Paris Agreement now, which has this target of keep global temperature rises beneath 2 degrees, or if possible beneath 1.5 degrees, that's a target, but our current actions aren't actually achieving that. And again, we'll talk more about this in the climate lecture, but this is what we expect for coral reefs. So apart from the Arctic, coral reefs we expect to basically be devastated within our lifetimes. So this is 3 images from a paper from 2007 by a fantastic fantastic UQ researcher named Professor O.F. Goldberg. He's director of the Global Change Institute, which is just next door to us Here, fantastic researcher. If you get a chance to hear a lecture by Ove, go along, he's amazing. So he was the lead author in this paper in Science in 2007, where he and his colleagues presented 3 images of what they, as coral reef experts, expected coral reefs around the world to look like under different climate scenarios. The image on the left is coral reefs at about 1 degree warming. The image in the middle is at 2 degrees warming, and the image on the right is at 3 degrees warming. So even at 2 degrees, coral reefs are basically devastated. Pretty well no coral reefs. And at 3 degrees, just basically eroding rubble. So even at 2 degrees, like even if we achieve the 2 degree target, we're currently at 1 degree warming, even if we manage to keep, if we achieve the target of the Paris Agreement, we still won't have coral reefs. Now put your hand up if you reckon that that is a successful policy outcome. We will achieve the target. If we achieve 2 degrees and we don't have coral reefs, does anyone think that that is success? No, none of us do. And yet, that's the target that the international community has set. Even at 1.5 degrees, coral reefs are going to be severely impacted. So on current policies, including the Paris Agreement, it's not consistent with us having coral reefs in the future. Our current policies in countries like Australia, but also China and basically any country that has fossil fuels, no one is saying we're not going to develop our fossil fuels. We've all set these targets. Australia set a target. At the same time, we're saying we're going to develop all our fossil fuels. So Australia has about another 100, 150 years worth of coal left. There's no plan to leave any of that in the ground. There's no plan. So in fact, we have, this is a recent premier in Queensland, our state. So his name was Campbell Newman. And he said in 2012, we are in the coal business. If you want decent hospitals, schools and police on the beat, we all need to understand that. And if you saw in the election that we've just held in Queensland, there was a big fight about the Adani coal mine. It's very much this fight. There's the contrast between people who are saying we need to protect the reef and climate, we need to leave coal in the ground, and then people saying it's all about jobs. We want jobs. And so there's that. This is also a recent Prime Minister, 2014, Tony Abbott. He said if there was one fundamental problem above all out, because he was famous for repealing, Australia had a carbon tax for a little while, and Abbott won office saying he would repeal it. And this is him afterwards saying if there was one fundamental problem above all else with the carbon tax, it was that it said to our people, it said to the wider world that a commodity which in many years is our biggest single export, coal, somehow should be left in the ground and not sold. Well and truly, I can think of few things more damaging to our future. So this isn't just some person in the 1960s. This is a recent Prime Minister arguing that we have to develop all of our coal. So it's not like, I said there's not this utopia we're going to. We are right now in the middle of this massive fight for our future. And there are huge forces saying basically, screw the future. Party now. Get in, use it all, burn it all. Party like there ain't no tomorrow.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Argument fairly recently actually that the reason we had to shut down the coal mines in Australia is because we were one of the major exports to China and the international community deemed electricity one of the basic human rights.
Fantastic question. We can't shut down our coal because people need it for human rights to produce electricity. There's a world that we could explore there in terms of policy. Can I just say the first point I would make is no one's saying close down coal overnight. A few years ago there was the Zero Carbon Australia policy which had a proposal to basically repower Australia within a decade. So basically close down all our coal-fired power stations, repower to completely renewables within a decade. That would be a radical step, but they said it was doable. I think it's, if it's not doable, then I'd much rather, imagine this. If, you might have children yet, but just imagine you've got a child and your child has been condemned to death. And Are you going to just sit there passively and let it happen? Or are you going to do everything you can to try and protect that child? Obviously, you're going to do everything you can. Same with our planet. We should be doing everything we can, even if we do lose coral reefs. The thing is, at the moment, we're not even really trying. Like, that's, I think, the fundamental point, the thing that really, if it doesn't kick you in the guts, that what are we doing when, like, this is still the debate in Australia. This should have been the debate 30 years ago, 20 years ago. If this was said in 1997, before the first coral bleaching event occurred on the Great Barrier Reef, it might have made sense. The fact that it's said in 2014 makes absolutely no sense from the perspective of having a Great Barrier Reef, having a Murray-Darling Basin that produces a huge amount of agricultural production. You know, the impacts of climate change are immense, immense. So, yeah, we should be setting goals that actually protect our people and not just sitting by and still having this debate. Because it is like your child has been condemned to death. What are you going to do to try and, you know, protect him or her? So our current approach is put your fingers in your ears and say, you know, climate change, not happening. Now, in that context, leaving most fossil fuels in the ground seems impossible at the moment, given our current debate. You look at, say, energy use in China, which is the world's largest consumer of coal. Australia's the largest exporter, but China uses massively more coal than we use. India uses massively more coal than we use. So it can seem overwhelming, like, you know, it seems hopeless. But I finished the course with these points as well, that, you know, we need to have hope. You need to work for the future we want. It's not just about sitting there and accepting, you know, that your child's going to be put to death. We've got to fight. And so every important change in history was impossible until it happened. Nelson Mandela. It's an inspirational message, but we have to live in reality. We have to deal with the difficulties of what we've got, and the incredible challenges. Obama, after Trump was elected, had a very balanced view, I thought. He said, you know, the path that our country's taken has never been a straight line. Sometimes we go forward and sometimes we move back, and that's okay. He was saying he must have been gutted by it, but he took a positive view. I think that it's important that we recognise that, you know, the world's not just going to end over Donald Trump or any particular thing. There's a whole heap of big problems, and we need to be part of the solution and actively working for them. So in that context, what's the role of environmental regulation? Love this quote from a wonderful Nobel Peace Laureate, Wangari Maathai, who was a Kenyan conservationist who fought for her people and fought for conservation. And she said, you cannot protect the environment unless you empower people, you inform them, and you help them understand that these resources are their own and that they must protect them. So, you know, we as people trying to protect the planet, you can't just force that down the throat of others. You can't just impose a whole heap of regulations and stop people doing things. We have to be creative and also empower people to recognise that these things are their own and they have to look after them. So, an important message. So, do you want to take I've got a few more things to say in this introduction. Does anyone want to take a break? We could take a break. Are you happy to go on? Okay, we'll grab out a page then. And so, blank page. I want you to have a blank page. Even if you don't have much paper, then you can just use a little bit. And I want you to draw a tree, okay? You might say, I'm not very good at drawing. That tree, anyone can draw that tree, okay? I need you to have a stem, and you're going to have some roots down the bottom, and then a big bubble, okay? Okay, I want to suggest some ideas to you. So, a good society. I want you to think, so we've got people from all over the world. Lots from Australia, but people from all over the world. And I'd say we've had people with different religions, different cultural backgrounds. So I want to ask you if you agree with some things being goals that our society And when I say our society, I'd like you to try and think, if you're from China or you're from any country, think about your society and think if that goal, you think that is part of your society. So I want to try and span all cultures. So an international goal set. So would everyone agree that a goal of every society on our planet, but think of yours, is jobs and employment? That's a goal. I think the only country that might not have that as a goal, I think, is the wonderful kingdom of Bhutan, which I've never been to, but you hear about the happiness index that they have there. But jobs and employment for pretty well every country is a universal goal. Everyone happy with that? Okay, so draw it in your tree. Jobs and employment. Let's think of it as the fruit. What goals that we want, the fruit of our tree of society, a good society. Would everyone agree that housing is also another goal that your society wants? Everyone happy with that? Clean food and water. Every society. Everyone happy with that? Okay, so that's a goal. Let's call it a universal goal. What about peace and security? Everyone would agree that that is a universal goal. Every society, whether it's Australia, whether it's Brazil, whether it's Mexico, whether it is China, whether it is Indonesia, every society wants to be at peace and secure. So, obviously there are some people who are fighting. So there's people blowing up bombs in various countries around the world, but the societies itself doesn't want that. The society overall wants to be at peace. Everyone would agree. And you only have to think of countries like Syria at the moment with the ongoing civil war, the incredible suffering that it creates. Public health. What do you think? So that's different to peace and security, but essentially freedom from disease, so linked with clean food and water, but a healthy society. Everyone happy with that? Strong families and communities. Okay, this one might be more controversial, but do you think that every society, again, whether it is Australia, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Russia, Botswana, India, every society, do you think, wants strong families and communities? And that also spans religions as well, doesn't it? Because whatever religion people subscribe to, all of those religions want strong families and communities. You have different community, obviously different religious beliefs, but the strong family and community is universal. You happy? This one's got to be controversial. Happiness. So thinking about this and thinking about goals, like if you look at a country like Australia and you think, well, we've got things like art galleries and we like to go to concerts and so there's sporting events, like at the moment there's a cricket game being played at the Gabba between Australia and the UK, and England. So where do they fit in terms of goals, do you think? Or can you think of a better goal, like in terms of the arts, but things like, say, walking on a clean beach? Let's just say, so everyone here loves the beach. So think of yourself, so coming weekend, walking on some lovely clean beach where you can just walk in the surf, it's lovely and clear, the water's clean, and you're happy. So is that a goal, having that? So you might say clean water, but why do we like walking on like a beach, or why do we like going to a music concert? And are they goals of our society that we have those things? And if they are goals of our society, what do you call them? Because you don't hear a politician talking about happiness unless, you're from Bhutan. Can I wrap all those things up in happiness and call that a goal, even though that's not normally, not normally in the policy agenda for an election? You won't see the political parties say, we want everyone to be happy. But if they've got a policy about, more support for the arts, more, building a new, art gallery or something, what are the societal goals?
Public welfare.
Sorry?
Public welfare.
Public welfare? So what do you mean by public welfare? Do you mean public health or?
Which includes like maybe some cultural, moral and aesthetic values.
Yeah, that's a good point. So instead of happiness, you could call it public welfare. So, yes, but think of yourself, say, going to a music concert, and which our society likes. What are we doing with the music? Or a sporting contest?
It's cultural values.
Cultural values? It could be culture, strong culture, maybe. So there could be a different way to describe it. I would say that these are labels that I've put up just for the purposes of this discussion. So, if cultural wellness or cultural or public well-being was a different label, could be a different label from that. I actually like happiness because it's a simple, straightforward term that everyone understands. Okay, I'm going to go into the roots now, but before I do that, are there any other goals that you think are missing that our society has? Education? I'm going to come back to that. Is that a goal? Is going to be my question. But can I park education for a moment? Because it is a really good point.
Can I say freedom? Freedom of religion.
Freedom, that is a fantastic point. Can I park freedom and come back to it? So, but freedom?
Clean air.
Sorry?
Clean air.
Clean air. We've got clean food and water. So, yeah, clean air. Could we include that? Maybe clean food, water and air. Yeah. Good point. Yes? Sustainable development. What in sustainable development would you be developing though? What do you want? You want housing, you want jobs, you want clean food and water, don't you, from sustainable development? It might affect all of those things, so it might be a goal within them. Great, those are all good points. Any others do you think that are goals? Equality, that's a good point. I might come back to that one as well. No one's put up money. Is anyone suggesting money? Is money a goal?
Yes, money needs to reach all of those things.
Yeah, so maybe housing, maybe, but it isn't actually a goal, even though it's a big focus, isn't it, for us, for our societies. But is it actually a goal, or is it just something that you use to then get, a house or buy food? Yep. Or achieve happiness as well, if you buy yourself concert tickets or whatever. Yes?
Thinking a bit more abstractly, influence in ways of influence on other societies, so that's where money would come in, having a good economy and having all of these things as being, you have that and you want to influence other people to have that, or
Right, yeah.
have control over an international space.
Influence.
I feel like that's a goal for a lot of societies. I don't know if it's a good one though, but
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. Influence. I don't actually have a pen on me, but I should write that one down. I'll have a think about that. What do you guys think? Influence. Is that a goal?
I think it's like money in the fact that all societies want to have it and all societies are going to work for it, but it's not a part of what we consider a good society thing. Like, we're not putting it on the tree, but it's definitely a foundation of our
it's a
society.
truth of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because influence can quite quickly become dominance, doesn't it? So if you think about, say, China at the moment with the South China Sea, it's trying to dominate that area. Obviously Donald Trump wants to dominate the whole world. So influence can become dominance depending on probably where you sit in the pecking order of how big your military is. Did you have?
Or maybe if you're talking about influence but not on like the national scale for the people in the society, like a person can look at agency, giving people an identity and agency to speak out or
Yeah, that's really interesting. Identity.
engage with the government and
Those are all really good suggestions. I now I've lost track. So we had freedom. There's another really good one that I parked before. So
Education, freedom,
education,
equality.
clean air, and I think we said just with clean air it can go in with clean food and water. So education, freedom, influence / dominance, identity. Was there any others that I've forgotten in my goldfish brain? Sorry? Equality?
Growth can be in there as
Sorry?
well. Growth.
Growth. That's a really interesting one as well. Growth.
Politicians that like us to believe that we have to grow to be successful.
Yeah, growth is a really interesting one as well. Maybe it's a nice, my tree metaphor is a nice one for that, because maybe the tree is growing at the same time. But really with growth, we really want to maintain all of those things, don't we? So growth, it's in itself, we want society potentially to grow, but it's within all of these things. We want, like, you wouldn't want growth at the expense of peace. You know? Do you think?
Or at the expense of the environment.
Yep. So growth is a really interesting one. No one's mentioned service to God. Might reflect our... But in some societies have a very much a religious focus. In Australian society, we tend to be non-religious in terms of our public goals. I haven't put up service to God there, but there are many societies where service to God, whatever their God might be, whether it's a Muslim society or a Catholic Christian society or another religion, however they conceive God to be, I haven't put it up there. In particular, not simply for my own views, but simply because I don't see any of those as being universal. So, you know, if you've got one country that has service to God as a state goal, then obviously Australia doesn't have that. But there's many societies where that is not, so it's not a universal goal. Does that, everyone happy with that? Okay, anything else? Okay, those are the goals, but now let's look at the roots. What sustains them? And this is where I'd like to really bring in good governance and justice. So if you think about those goals and think about it as a tree, all of those things that we want, you know, we've got such a massive population now, we've got such complicated societies. We can't maintain peace and security, for instance, without, say, police force, without, you know, government, for instance, to install a sewage system so that, you know, our waste can be taken away and properly treated, and controls on pollution, controls on, you know, where we build things. So good governance and justice is a component or part of the roots of maintaining that. Is everyone happy with that? Education. So your point before about education and why I parked it was because, yes, it's, you know, obviously everyone here is studying. We're at a university. We think, you know, we all agree education is really, really important. But is education a goal in itself? I think no. Education is something that we want to use to contribute to society, and we want generally to be achieving the sorts of goals, even if it's happiness, even if you're doing an arts degree in, you know, fine arts, for instance, you know, and you are wanting your own happiness and, you know, potentially to contribute to society in that way. But the education itself isn't generally a societal goal as such, I think. Yes?
But wouldn't you say that education could break a lot of barriers from like the difference between like what we would say a developing world and the developed world? For example, like
That's a great point.
breaking out
Yeah.
of the cycle of poverty, like education would be the main thing that could do that.
That is a great point. Education might lift you out of poverty. Again, though, if we think about what, you know, it's the roots that you're growing. So if you think about your tree, you as a person, you know, education is what's lifting you out, but what you actually want to achieve isn't education for its own right. You want to achieve it for a job or employment, and then house and food, and then also to contribute to society. Is that? So yes, it can be. What I want to distinguish between what are the outcomes we want and things that we use to achieve those outcomes. And finally, as the taproot to our tree, can you put this in on your picture? So maintaining nature, the environment, ecological processes, the point before about sustainability, I actually don't think it's a goal in its own right. It's not something that, you know, like if you look at people who are concerned about their jobs and you say, but it's got to be sustainable, and they say, well, no, we're more interested in jobs. The point that I would make is it's a false dichotomy if you're looking at jobs versus the environment, because jobs, particularly long-term jobs, if you don't maintain the environment, you know, you basically kill the tree. So all of those things that we want to achieve depend upon the environment and maintaining ecological processes, and good governance and justice and education. So look, this is a metaphor that I'd like to suggest to you, because one of the most common concepts within society right now is this jobs versus environment dichotomy. And I really want to emphasize to you that it's a false dichotomy, but it is so pervasive. It is so pervasive. And if you don't consciously have a different concept to replace it with, you often will fall back into this jobs versus environment. So a good society is sustainable, and it's not that we are protecting the environment for its own sake. Well, you can do that, but very much we are protecting it because we depend upon it. And all of these things that we love about society depend upon it as well. So I had a couple of other goals, but we've got such a good list here as well. You could add in other things. I had a general question: is obeying God another social goal? Is freedom another goal? And a class a few years ago suggested freedom as well. And I thought about it, and I've resisted putting it in because I think particularly in our culture, but particularly in the United States of America, freedom has become a term that's been corrupted for anti-government. So freedom is seen as, individual freedom is seen as such like the freedom to bear arms in the US is such a divisive debate, and it's also seen. My perception of in the United States is particularly that it's basically seen as a euphemism, a nice term for anti-government, and I just think the whole anti-government debate is just so wrong, because we need good government. We want good government. We depend on good government. So we want freedom, but I wrap it up in the happiness one, and I don't put it there. If you want to put freedom down, that's fine. So you could add to those goals if you wanted to. This is just a set that I've thought about a lot because of this jobs versus environment debate, and I think it's just so shallow. Thoughts on that? Why don't we take a bit of a break and we get up, stretch your legs. I'm also going to go and sort out, we should have some coffee and tea somewhere too. I'll find where that is so that we can get some coffee and tea and break. So if you want to bring along a mug, but why don't we take, what's the time now? Sorry, I don't mean to go for an hour and a half each time. I'll try and take breaks at about 50 minutes. So why don't we take say a 10-minute break now, get up, stretch your legs, come back, and we'll finish off our introduction. Okay, so let's kick back off. Before we took a break, we were talking about goals, and I'd put up this picture of a tree and we'd filled it in. And the key thing I wanted you to take from this is not specifically the goals that we've listed there. What I really wanted to emphasise is there's a whole range of goals that we have as society. Protecting the environment and good governance and justice are foundational to achieving those goals. They're not in opposition. And it is so common in our culture to see the dichotomy between jobs and money and environment, that you can't have both. And it is just such a false dichotomy. Okay, in terms of good governance, I just wanted to mention that because our course is very much about good governance. I say this again within the context that we work in reality. We work in reality where governments are imperfect. There are still lots of problems, but good governance is something we're striving for, and us in this course is very much about governance. Okay, good governance is epitomised by predictable, open and enlightened policy making, a bureaucracy imbued with a professional ethos acting in furtherance of the public good, the rule of law, transparent processes and a strong civil society participating in public affairs. Poor governance, on the other hand, is characterised by arbitrary policy making, unaccountable bureaucracies, unenforced or unjust legal systems, the abuse of executive power, a civil society unengaged in public life and widespread corruption. So two ends of a spectrum. Corruption is a huge part of our society and many societies around the world. So there's actually a convention, I mentioned the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. I remember a student many years ago in this course who was from Colombia, and we were talking about her research topic, and she said, well, one of the fundamental things with my country is that corruption is so endemic. It's really hard to implement any of these international treaties because it is such a pervasive issue, and it can be a huge challenge, not just in Colombia but in many societies, including in Australia, where corruption is a component of our governance system. The perceptions. This was an interesting map from a report by Baker McKenzie, a law firm from a few years ago, but they surveyed their clients who worked internationally, and they got essentially this interesting graph about countries where the perception from these international companies or international clients they had for where corruption was worst. So you can see all through Russia, Africa, many countries where corruption is seen as a huge issue. And so this course is about empowering you with an understanding of the major international environmental frameworks so that you can contribute to good governance wherever your career leads you. And so can I lead on then to who am I, who am you? So where we've come so far is just to paint a big picture about many issues and things that really just set the scene for our course. In that context, who am I, who am you? So this is me. Might seem pretty obvious since I'm standing out in front of you, but many students are going to listen to just recording. So this is me, Chris. You can see that all those law shows where they have incredibly handsome lawyers acting. You can see that lawyers are by nature just incredibly handsome. Just comes with the job career. Okay, you can laugh. So. Okay, career summary. So I was a student here in UQ in the 90s. That's back when we used, as I said, those stone tablets. You had to chip your notes. So you guys on your computers, we had to chip our notes in a stone tablet. So I did a Bachelor of Science in Ecology and a law degree. I aimed to work in environmental law. I went and worked for the Queensland Department of Environment for a couple of years, implementing and enforcing environmental law. Came back to Brisbane and worked as a barrister. I did my Masters in Law and a PhD then at QUT. And so I worked for about 10 years as a barrister, did my PhD. And then in 2010, I had my partner and I had our first child, and I had this big long case, and my partner Brooke said to me, if you do another one of those cases, Chris, don't expect me to be here. So I thought, that's a pretty good indication that I need to make a bit of a step change. So I came and taught for, from 2010 to just beginning of this year. And I taught this course as well as a first semester course on regulatory frameworks, which is domestic environmental law, and this was the companion with it. The beginning of this year I took a 6 months off, refresh, recharge, and the school asked me to come back and teach this course as a casual lecturer. So here I am. And yeah, I love this course, it's so much fun. My professional experience is mainly focused on enforcing domestic environmental laws, in which international law and policy is only an issue, a component. So sort of cases I've been involved in, we'll talk this afternoon about Antarctica and Japanese whaling as an example. So a decade ago I was involved in a really big court case involving Japanese whaling in Antarctica. Obvious international links, but it was about enforcing national environmental laws. And I suppose part of my experience is, and I want to really emphasise in this course, even if you are working at a domestic level, international law is an important component of it. And so understanding the international framework is important, even though you're working at a domestic level. Okay, I love bushwalking. This is a picture of me down in southwest Tasmania a few years ago. Have some lovely girls. This is Isabel, and this is her little sister Eva, Isabel and Eva. So this is just when Eva was born. Let's just go back a few times because you can't have too many pictures of Isabel and Eva is my theory. They're both a bit bigger now. This is me when I was about 15, I think, and my dad was standing on Whitehaven Beach in the Whitsundays. So I'm from North Queensland, and I was standing here, and I remember this day. It was a magical day, and the sun was so bright. Who's been to Whitehaven Beach? So amazing beach, best beach in the world. I see these surveys of best beaches in the world sometimes, and they don't all have Whitehaven as number one. Apparently there's some beach in Rio de Janeiro that's pretty good, and I say pooey to that beach. No, I'm only joking. I'm sure it's a great beach in Rio. But Whitehaven is an amazing beach. It's a few kilometres long, brilliant white sand. And I remember on this day walking along, and have you ever been on a beach where when you walk just in the shallows, air comes up out of the sand, and it's sort of like you're in this spa? That was amazing. I was walking along and all these bubbles coming up, and the sunlight was so bright, and so in this picture I'm squinting away just because it was just amazingly bright. So I grew up in the Whitsundays in the Great Barrier Reef, and so a question that's really driven me for well over a decade is this question. Will we leave the Great Barrier Reef for our children? So when I started my PhD in 2001, and I really wanted to look at the effectiveness of environmental laws, and I was looking at a case study of laws protecting the Great Barrier Reef, and I started my PhD thinking about and looking at the science. I thought particularly things like pollution, land source pollution, fishing, crown of thorn starfish were the big threats to the Great Barrier Reef, and I thought climate change was some distant threat. But then as I got into the science, I was shocked to realise that actually the science was saying climate change was a clear and present danger right now, and it could wipe out the reef within a decade or two. And I was just shocked by it, and it became a huge focus in my PhD. And this question has really driven me in professional practice sense is, will we leave the Great Barrier Reef for our children? And unfortunately, I think the clear answer we're giving to that right now is no, we're not going to. We are too lazy, we are too selfish to take the steps that we need to even have the chance of protecting it. And I think that is such an indictment on us, collectively. Okay, who are you? You are amazing. is what I'd like to say, because I always think when I am in a class like this about how many tests each one of you have been through to get here. Okay, so if you're undergraduate or postgraduate, it doesn't matter. You would have done, if you think about every test you passed since you were like 4 years old, there would be hundreds to get you here right now. So you've got this incredible body of knowledge and experience, and yeah, you're awesome. So here's some students a few years ago in a tree. I haven't been able to get this year's split of domestic versus international, but this was the split a few years ago. So the bigger pie chart is the postgraduate course 7124, and the smaller one is the undergraduates. But effectively, we'll have half or a big chunk of the class will be international. So 50% Australians, but then, so who here is from China? Okay, so we've got a couple. Who here's, what other countries that people are from? Canada, great. Cambodia, fabulous. Japan, wonderful. Chile. Myanmar, great. Anyone else? Persia, wonderful. So we've got a whole range of countries, and there'll be a huge number of people who are doing the course externally, who, yeah, from all around the world. So this is the sort of this was the class back a few years ago, and just to put up the countries that they were from. So, you know, we've got Canada there, we've got the Middle East, lots of people from Southeast Asia, as well as South America. So, you know, the world looks like it's got chickenpox, you know, when we look at our class. And just some stories of past students. This is Maria, who was a student in 2013, and she emailed me after she'd done the course, when she was working for the government of Mexico. So this was an email she sent a couple of years ago in March, 20th of March 2015. Hello Chris, how are things going for you? For me, after 7 months of looking for a job, I finally got one. It's very well related to your course. My position is as International Cooperation Specialist within it's a Mexican government department, which is the National Commission for Use and Knowledge of Biodiversity. I will be looking at international agreements such as the Convention on Biological Diversity, CITES, etc. Doesn't want to sit around in office. I emailed her back saying, hi, it'd be great if I could use your story for the course. And she'd already changed jobs by then. It'd be an honour for me if you could tell my story in your course. However, 4 months ago, I was offered the opportunity to go back to work with Indigenous and rural communities for biodiversity conservation and human well-being. So I quit my job at International Cooperation, which was really interesting, but really far away from my life expectations, and I guess suits the office and not completely my thing, and moved back to the Mayan tropical rainforest of southeast Mexico as the coordinator for the Lacandon jungle for Mesoamerican biological corridor. And then she talks about another friend of hers from Peru, who was off with the negotiation team for Peru to the Conference of the Parties 20 in Lima that year. That was the climate change negotiations. So, and she went on about what she was doing in terms of coordinating biodiversity. So, is anyone here already working for government? So back in your home countries? So does anyone want to say what you work for?
I actually work for government here.
You work for government here in Australia? Yep. And you're in renewables, aren't you?
No, I work as a media advisor, so my background's in communication.
Okay, media and communications. And is it an environment-related portfolio? You don't have to say the portfolio.
No.
Something else? Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else working for government? Yep.
I'm in education, human resources though, so.
Okay,
not
education.
sure
Yep.
I'm the ranger in charge of Springbrook National Park.
Great to see you. Yeah, so we're going down to Springbrook in a couple of days. We've got the ranger in charge as part of the course. It's fantastic, so great to have you. No, it's fine. It's quite common for many of the students, particularly in the environmental management masters, to come sponsored by their governments, to come to do the degree and go back to their work after their degree. So, or if you are not yet working for government, obviously it's one of the career paths that you might go into, and it's quite common for, for, say, people who, in this sort of course, to have positions where you go on negotiating teams. So here's another past student, Karen, who was from the Philippines. She did her research paper on a Ramsar wetland. And then she sent me this image later, because I think one of her recommendations was that there should be better signage for the Ramsar wetland. So she sent me this picture showing the great signage. I don't think it was a direct result of her recommendations, but it was pretty funny. And then here was a student a few years ago who was, one of the people working for government. She was Beti Musafa, who was a Malaysian lady who, she had an agricultural degree and she'd been on multiple meetings for climate change. She was in the agricultural department, but as a member of a team of about 20 or 30 going into international negotiations. And Carol from Zambia, who, amazing lady, and another lady from Zambia at one of the conferences. So these are all just past students. So in summary, who are you? You're amazing. You're smart. You're not here for the money. I already know that. If you were, if you're after money in your career, then you'd be doing, accounting or law or business or some other soulless degree. What you're doing says that you want to have a good job, but money isn't your primary driver, and you want to make a positive contribution to the world. So, what's the role of international regulation in your careers? This is a question I just want to focus on for a moment. So you might think of international and environmental policy overall as something like this complicated puzzle. You can think about environmental policy as like a jigsaw, like this. Is that a common idea that you have when you think about solving environmental problems? Is a jigsaw is it a good metaphor to use, do you think? Well, when you think about solving environmental problems, is there a metaphor, an idea that you think conveys what you think we're trying to do? Yep.
I always think of like a messy ball of string.
A messy ball of string.
What they want, where they're going, or and
that's lovely.
Together in different ways.
Okay, a messy ball of string where no one knows where they're going and we're all tied together in different ways. That's a wonderful metaphor as well. Yes.
Potentially on the games, sort of the Jenga. So you pull parts out, it becomes sort of...
Oh, Jenga.
Yeah.
Jenga. You know that? That's like you get these big pile of boards and you put them all in a pile and then you pull them out and you lose if you collapse the pile. Yep. So Jenga. Yep. Anyone else? Okay, along with your messy ball sort of idea, I was just going to say that if we think about environmental problem solving as a jigsaw, it's actually more not like this neat jigsaw. It's actually all the bits, all broken up. And also you've got this like million-piece, imagine you've got a million-piece jigsaw puzzle with all of these similar colours that, there's not just all the edges you can fill in, and you don't have the overall picture. So it's incredibly hard and you don't actually know what the overall picture is, but you're trying to put together bits. I think that's a pretty good metaphor. And I really love this quote. When I was doing my PhD a decade ago, this was a quote that really struck with me, and I've never been able to find anything else that this fellow wrote. It was just a chapter in a book and about environmental policy evaluation. And Robert Bartlett, who was a US writer, wrote in 1994, "Policy, especially environmental policy, is more a matter of gardening than engineering or building, of cultivating than participating or acting. Old policies contribute to the soil in which new policies are sown and nurtured." I think that's a really, really good metaphor and idea to have in your mind, because it's so easy. I think, we start our careers and we think we're going to solve things. And people can, it's really common to see people come into the conservation sector particularly and work really hard for a few years and then get disheartened, burn out and go and work in some other area. So I don't want you to do that. You need to sustain yourself. But one idea you can have in your mind is not that you're actually going to solve problems, but that you're contributing to a garden where you're going to pass on, hopefully, the garden in good shape to people that come after you, and you've inherited the garden from other people. So, I just suggest as an idea for your careers, don't get overwhelmed by the problems, and don't feel like you're necessarily going to solve the problems and they'll just be fixed. Because if you have that idea in your mind, you'll get disheartened. But if you think about it like gardening, where you've inherited a garden that's got some weeds growing in it and some problems, and but there's some things you can harvest, and you're going to nurture that garden and plant more crops and flowers. So think about your career in environmental policy as a gardener. I think it's a really powerful idea. And powerful ideas, I think, are really important to sustain you. Okay. In that context, should we go into the course profile? Everyone happy? We had a break a little while ago. Is everyone happy to keep going on? Okay. So given your handout, does anyone not have the extracts from... I'm sorry that it got printed. The course profile is obviously available in full on the Blackboard site. But all I've done with this is just extract the 3 bits of assessment so that we can talk about them, and also the criteria and standards. And I'm sorry that they're printed out in portrait rather than in landscape. But if you're still able to read them, obviously you can get them in full on the Blackboard site. Okay, big picture. We'll come back to the handout, so I'll come to assessment in a moment. But can we just paint the picture for the course overall? And so I love metaphors. So as a metaphor, the big picture, can I suggest that you can think about teaching and learning in a complex course like this, something like a game of chess. Okay, so I'm thinking about how I help you to learn, and you guys are engaged with the course and material and learning. So it's a bit like a game of chess in that there's multiple pieces moving, so that I'm going to move, and hopefully you will move in your own minds through the course, and we will have this essentially engagement where there's not just one thing that's going on. So this course isn't just about the lectures, it's not just about the research paper, it's not about an assignment at the end. It's all of those things and more, and they're all, in my mind, they're meant to interact and hopefully help you move along and learn valuable things for your career. So the course is designed around engaging your curiosity, creativity and imagination, and to give you practical skills and knowledge for your future career to help the world. So there's 2 components there. Creativity, curiosity, imagination, they're all fun things. I also want to give you practical skills though. So very much in designing this course, when it was originally set up by me a few years ago, I wanted the big focus to be on the research paper and policy recommendations, because most of you won't work in international environmental regulation directly. Some people will. You'll go in negotiation teams and the like, and the content will be directly applicable. But many people won't. And so what are the practical skills that you can take from this course? For me, it's improving your research skills and also policy recommendations. So that's why there's a big focus in the research paper on policy recommendations. Because one of the things I really emphasize is it's easy to see a problem. You can look at any sphere in environmental policy and see a whole heap of problems. Similarly, in other areas, whether you are, say you work in government in, say, crime or education, for instance, there are all of these problems. And lots of people will complain about the problems. It's relatively rare, though, to find people who can make good recommendations, practical recommendations that actually go some way to solving those problems. So it's easy to see problems. It's actually really hard to come up with solutions that even move you slightly along the way, even if you don't solve them completely, but actually you achieve some better outcome than is currently being achieved. Because the simple things are generally already done. The things that we get bogged down with in policy implementation are hard. And it's not just a solution that you can say, oh, if we threw $1 billion into this problem, we could solve it. That's great. But, you know, most governments just aren't willing to, you know, give unlimited money to, you know, solving every problem. They've got a limited budget. Even if you're the, you know, a big government, you will have a budget that has limits. And so you have to prioritise. So even if you work for government and you want to implement some solution, if it's going to cost a lot of money, it makes it harder to get up as a policy recommendation. So good policy recommendations are hard. And their skills, the skills that, you know, people that have the skills to make good recommendations and actually implement and achieve good outcomes are sought after. So that's the practical skill that I hope you take away from this course, is thinking about policy. And even if you don't end up working for government, if you work for some big company, you know, big companies have, you know, will all have problems with their own implementation of their business. And people who can come up with solutions that are cost effective, you know, help them to achieve their business goals more, those are valuable employees. So that's the practical knowledge and skills I want you to take away. Cool? A theme of the course is that international law and policy is not something that only world leaders do in faraway capitals. So it's not just, you know, Barack Obama or, Donald Trump or, you know, international leaders. That there are your careers may well take you into the international arena, and also international law and policy affects you every day of your life. Every day. So just like as an example, give us, thinking around this classroom, what's an international policy issue that's relevant to, you know, where we are right now? So everyone's looking at the lights. So why, or the air conditioning you can think of? What are those being powered by? Electricity, obviously. So what's the international issue? Climate change, obviously, isn't it? And where that power is coming from. So UQ, you might know, has this huge solar array. So right now, because the campus is not really in a lot of use, we might actually be running completely on solar. But that, even if we are, it occurs within an overall electricity system that's predominantly still coal. And there's huge policy issues at a domestic level right now, big arguments going on at a national level about how we secure electricity, affordable electricity into the future, and also deal with climate change. Huge domestic issue. And also going all the way up to international negotiations about climate change. So, you know, just the lights in this room bring in international issues. It affects us every day. Okay, let's think about the course profile. I haven't given you this in the extract, but the overall course aim is to develop your knowledge of international environmental regulatory frameworks, your research skills, and your ability to think critically about international and national environmental problems. And there's a number of learning objectives, including content ones early on, and then you'll see 6 and 7 particularly, evaluate the effectiveness of the implementation of environmental policy based on sound research design and empirical evidence, and 7, make recommendations for improving the effectiveness of the implementation of environmental policy based on those things. So those 6 and 7 are very much what I hope you get from the research paper. And then an overall critical evaluation and ethical perspectives as well. So hoping to challenge you. In terms of learning resources, you don't have to buy any books. There's an online free textbook that I've given you a link to. There's a few online free textbooks you can get from the library as well. But and there are books that you can buy. So these are just a couple off my shelf. I particularly like the one on the right, Gillian Triggs from 2006, an incredible Australian international lawyer, and has been in the news a lot in the last decade fighting with the federal government over human rights. You don't have to buy one of those books though. You can get them, and they're okay for background principles, but really, I just think most textbooks aren't particularly helpful. And what I would like you to do more is to use online resources, because all of the treatises we're going to talk about are available online and have great websites, and you can actually get a lot more from those than you can from a dead tree textbook. So I wouldn't recommend going and buying anything. You'll notice that the textbook, the online one, the 2006 one, so it's a decade old, but for general principles, none of that's changed. So, if you want to read about sovereignty or customary international law, you can go and look at that textbook. Those things haven't changed, and then update your knowledge if you want with, with reference to current websites. Because even if you bought a textbook that was just published this year, it's basically going to be out of date in terms of climate negotiations and the like. Also, law textbooks just tend to be black and white text. There's no pictures, no graphs, no maps, and they're so boring. So yes.
So in the reading list of the books,
yep.
There is 2 books that it says required, and the other one says...
no, there shouldn't be anything required. Recommended?
No, there is... Most of them say recommended, but there are 2 books that it says required. 4 degrees, something.
Let's just look at that. So, where did you find that? In the course profile?
Yes.
Okay, let's... should we just look at the international? 7124. There shouldn't be. If there is, I'll change that. Learning resources. Recommended resources.
But what I understand is that books are not required.
Yeah, no, I haven't. I won't go and check all 4 of them. Has anyone else seen that? There shouldn't be. There's no books that you must buy for this course.
Okay, in this page, there is reading list.
There's a reading list.
Yeah.
Okay.
And say there's okay. No, now they say recommend. Maybe I saw the last year.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't have even been last year. I'm not a believer in textbooks. I'm much more a believer in websites and, use the information that's there. And I've deliberately given you free online resources and not made anything required, because I don't want you to go and spend a few $100s on a textbook. When I personally, there's so many textbooks that I've got that just sit on my shelf, and I don't want you to have to do that. So, is that cool? Okay, so learning resources, we'll use mainly websites. Don't worry about buying a textbook. Obviously there's a huge amount of information on the, well, not huge, but Blackboard site, information about lectures, handouts, those sorts of things. The learning activities, actually, can I hand out, another handout? So in the course profile, there's this black and white. The electronic course profiles that we have at UQ, they're good because they're uniform across all courses in the university, but they're quite clunky in terms of graphics. So that's what it looks like, the learning activities in section 4. But what I've done is just create a nicer version in a Word version that is available on the Blackboard site. Again, sorry, the back side of it was meant to print out in landscape, but you can still read. So our lectures this week and the schedule is on the first side, and then our program this week. Today, obviously, we're at introductory stage. We are basically going to work, if I go back to the first side, we're starting with the international, we're working chronologically through all of the major international treaties since 1945. So you see there the first, or lecture 2, United Nations Charter 1945, Whaling Convention 1946, GATT 1947, Antarctic Treaty 1959, Ramsar Convention 1971. Basically, we're going chronologically. And I'm doing that deliberately so that we can have a structure for the course, but also it builds up the story of international regulation. So it's a deliberate structure, in part because, again, part of my PhD was trying to look at how you describe environmental legal systems. And if you look at most textbooks on environmental law and policy, they will break up or organise themselves into chapters on things like climate change, biodiversity, law of the sea, ozone, which is okay, and a lot of international treaties have those sorts of terms in them as well. But if you actually think about it, all of those things are overlapping. So like the Climate Change Convention, climate change is going to have huge implications for biodiversity. So, you know, if you're going to talk about biodiversity conservation, you can't just talk about the Convention on Biological Diversity, because that doesn't make any, you know, and just ignore climate change. So, and that happens at, you know, at every level. So we try and break up environmental law and policy into these nice little groups, but reality defies those groups. And even at a domestic level, our laws don't fit neatly into those groups. So I use the groups sometimes in teaching because they're a simple way to think about law and policy, but we need a more advanced way of thinking about it. So, but we still need structure. So what I've done is group, well not group, but basically use the chronological development of international law and policy, and so in each of these major treaties we'll look at them, but recognise the overlaps with other areas and not try and separate them out, but just see them as part of the current environment that we have that has really developed over the last 70 years. Does that make sense? Okay, so Wednesday we've got a field trip, but essentially up till then we're working chronologically through these major treaties. This afternoon and tomorrow we'll have a couple of workshops on research design and making good policy. Just mention something as a schedule. So I sent an email about having spent a month working on a big coal mine case. My Silk, the Queen's Counsel who's leading me in the case, was meant to appear tomorrow for a directions hearing that we've got. So it's going to trial next year. We've put in our written submissions that I've been working on for a month. He was meant to appear. He's stuck in a trial, and we've got a few contentious issues to work out tomorrow. My apologies, but I need to basically go to court. It's about a climate change case. But I need to be in court at 9:15 tomorrow for probably half an hour. So is it okay if tomorrow we don't start before 10:30? I might even be a few minutes late after that. And I go off to court and have a fight there, and then come and be nice and relaxed when I get here. So yeah, we're fighting with this. It's a coal mine out at... so my website... I've got a website about environmental law in Australia, and it's got a whole heap of case studies on it, mainly about Australian cases, a lot of them that I've been involved in. And the particular case that I'm working on at the moment is about the New Auckland coal mine. So it's a coal mine that's proposed to be in its third stage. It's out at near Oakey, about 2 hours, near Toowoomba, about 2 to 3 hours west of Brisbane. And that's a picture of it. And there's another picture of it. So it started in about 2001, and it's had 2 stages. Has been pulling out about 8 million tonnes of coal for the last decade. They've applied for a third stage, and the surrounding farmers who hate it for noise and dust as well as groundwater impacts fought against it, and they had a massive win earlier in the year. And the company has essentially appealed against the massive win that they had in the Supreme Court of Queensland, and having a big fight about whether essentially the approvals associated with the third stage of this mine. Now, the farmers are mainly interested in it for noise and dust issues and groundwater, and I'm representing them. But for me, these sorts of big cases about coal are about climate change. It's about basically saying this coal has got to, so basically making it as difficult as possible, even though our current government policy is dig up and mine all of this coal. So for the last decade, I've been involved in a whole series of big court cases about coal mines. And so tomorrow is really, related to that. So you can go and have a look at that website if you'd like, but is that okay if we don't start before 10:30 tomorrow? And then what I will do, so tomorrow, if we don't start before 10:30, I'll do the workshop sometime in the afternoon, and then people who want to go, you can go. But what I might do is do the UNCLOS lecture, might probably have a break and go and have pizzas or something, and then come back, and I might just do the lecture recordings late so that we don't, essentially the recording is done. And I've also I had some supplementary lectures that I wanted to update about good policy, thinking about policy, which I don't want to make a major component of the course, but I was going to record some supplementary lectures so that people can listen to them or not. So I thought I might just record them tomorrow. So tomorrow I mightn't finish until like 8 o'clock or something. So people can obviously leave, but tomorrow I'll just record some supplementary lectures which you can listen to or not, or you can attend or not. Does that sound okay? So we'll keep essentially the order, but UNCLOS we might do we might reverse the order of, because the workshops are really just meant to be a bit of a break from lectures to where we're more talking. Does that sound okay? Okay, any questions on that? So, and then Wednesday we've got the field trip. I'll talk about that in a moment more. And then we finish on Friday, and then there's research design presentations. So essentially I'd like to have your research design presentation within the next week. Anyone that wants to can do it on Friday, but you won't be forced on. So you don't have to, but it'll be an opportunity. I'm sure there'll be some people who are ready to go. And also if you want to leave Brisbane and go, home, you might just want to get it done. It's really meant to just be some early feedback. So if you've got an idea and you want to present it on Friday, great. I'm happy to stay as long as people want. And on Monday as well, so in a week's time, I've booked the planning studio. You don't have to attend, but anyone who wants to take the weekend, but then come and present face to face next Monday, and I'll post this on Blackboard, but next Monday, I've basically got the whole day where if you want to, so if you're thinking about it, we've got a week of lectures. You can either present your research proposal on Friday, and then, if you're leaving Brisbane, great. Or you can come and do it on Monday and do it face to face. Or you can have the whole week and just upload your presentations, and we can either Skype or talk on the telephone or something. Basically you get a week to do your research proposal. It's only worth 5%, and what I want to do is give you some early feedback on your ideas to make sure you're not gone too big or not too small. It's sort of about giving you early feedback. I call it finding a Goldilocks problem, if everyone knows the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. So the little girl and the porridge was too hot, too cold, or just right. So with good research, particularly advanced research, one of the biggest problems is finding the right size problem. And you might think, because often, you get it, even at university, you get given a topic. So you don't really have a choice about what your topic is. But here, you've got a big choice about the topic. The hard thing that faces you is what to choose and then how to scope it. And even for, even though ours is a relatively small research project, even for a PhD, that's one of the hardest problems, because you might think 3 years full time you could do big problem. And that's true. But the classic thing with PhDs is people start wanting to solve all of the problems in the world, and as they go along they find they can't. And so you constantly scope down until you end up looking at, this small part of the overall problem. So classic problem for research is scoping. So what I want to do is give you some early feedback on your scoping. So does that make sense? And pizza's on Friday if you want.
Are you submitting like a written proposal with it as well, or is it just a presentation?
Yeah, how about I go on to that? Because I'll go on to the research proposal in a moment, give you some more points on that. Okay, field trip, Wednesday down to Springbrook. So about an hour and a half, 2 hours, about an hour and a half, south of Brisbane in the Gold Coast hinterland. It's my favourite bushwalking in Queensland. I often, Hinchinbrook Island. Southeast Queensland, let's define it. It's an absolutely beautiful, beautiful, beautiful part of Queensland. And we're going there to experience World Heritage. So we'll have talked about World Heritage tomorrow. We're going there to experience it, particularly for people who maybe bushwalking isn't a thing that you do regularly. Springbrook is just amazing. So I wanted to take you there. It's really just about the experience. We'll walk around. I'm not going to try and, point out plants or things. We're really going there just to go, wow, this is amazing. World Heritage rocks. That's our whole purpose. So we'll go on a walk. This is where we start. So we look out at that. And this is some pictures taken by past students. So walking past, that's actually on the track. This is the students a few years ago standing under one of the waterfalls. So on the walk we go on, a lot of the tracks go behind the waterfalls. So you can see the class standing there. And we'll have a photo competition. So I often see, people have these fantastic cameras. And I know there was someone on the Blackboard site said she had a photography background. So we're having a photo competition. So bring your camera. And there are 2 categories. There's best picture and best series of pictures. And there is a chocolate prize. So we'll judge that on Thursday or Friday. Okay, so you can upload it. And it's a nice way for people who don't come on the field trip, they get to see some pictures of us as well. So photo competition, bring your camera. And this is some of the past students engaged in the competition. This is one of the previous winning entries. A lovely student standing under one of the waterfalls. She's actually not getting wet there. This is where you walk behind one of the waterfalls. This is Rainbow Falls. And yeah, another one of the winners, Philip from Kenya. And then some students, and this has been something that I've learnt with these past competitions, was it's really interesting to see what people focus on. So some people will, take these beautiful, landscape pictures that look amazing. But then there's this one student a few years ago from Thailand who took this amazing series of mosses and, just things you can hardly see. And this is, again, his series. And yeah, just these amazingly beautiful little microcosms that he captured. Yeah. Apart from the experience of World Heritage, I also really want to emphasise in this course generally, but also with the field trip, that's I think it's really important to stay in touch with wonderful places like Springbrook because they recharge you during your career and remind you what you're working to protect. It's really easy to get burnt out. So yeah, when I need to recharge, go down to Springbrook. Unfortunately, there's a $20 bus fee, which I hate and have fought against. I really find it annoying. If you're not coming because of the bus fee, please come and talk to me and I'll give you $20. But yeah, I've fought against it. This started a couple of years ago. I just think it's stupid, but the school imposes a $20 fee for the buses. So much as I hate it, it's there. And the choice I was given by the head of school was either have the bus fee or don't have the field trip. So, okay, assessment. Yes?
Are we paying to you or?
No, go onto the Blackboard site and there's a portal that you can just pay through, and they're using it to also just know how many students are coming too, so we get the right size bus. So cool. Okay, so really encourage you to come to Springbrook. It's a fabulous day out. really fun. It's about the experience and recharging. Okay, assessment. 3 things for the course: a research proposal worth 5%, research essay worth 50%, and the exam worth 45% at the end. So the research proposal is obviously linked to the research paper, and it's really about giving you some early feedback to know that you're in the right, you've got a problem that's not too big, that's not too small, it's appropriate. So it's due within 7 days of the course ending. As I say, it's only worth 5% and it's early feedback, and what I don't want you to do is drift until Christmas time, until after Christmas, and then the night before the research paper is due think, I've got to come up with a topic, I still haven't thought of a topic. I want you to commit early. And so you can be, hopefully your research is not stressful and not rushed at the end, but you can basically do it little by little, have a budget of time over the next 6 weeks and get your research paper done comfortably and fun and enjoyably. Okay, so you prepare a research proposal for the research paper and present it. You can do it in person or by Skype, whether you're internal or external. And yeah, this is all about helping you understand the research process and ensure you're on the right track for the research paper. So don't be scared about it. It's not meant to be stressful. Okay, there is a research design template available on the Blackboard site, and I'll talk more about that this afternoon when we talk about research design. So you can download this in Word, and I want you to identify things like what's your proposed title, what are your objectives. It's 2 pages, so you fill that out, and that you hand that in. And you also have a few slides as well that, just a slide of, a map of, your country that you're talking about. And, if you're doing, say, elephants in Kenya, have a picture of an elephant. There you go. Map of Kenya, title of your, picture of an elephant. That's all you need to do for the presentation. Okay, the marking criteria. There's nothing there about content in the sense that I'm not judging whether your scope is appropriate. All the criteria are is it clear and can you explain it? There's some recordings of past research proposals available. There's a link on the Blackboard site so you can just see what students have done in the past. Yeah, for external students who are listening to the recording, you don't need to listen to all of the lectures. You can listen to, say, the first lecture, the research design and workshop, and that's all you need to do. You don't need to listen to all of the lectures up till Friday, sort of cram them into the first week and a half. You can listen to them at your own pace over the next few months of the course. So the research proposal is linked to the research essay, worth 50%, and your task is to evaluate the effectiveness of the implementation of an international environmental regulatory framework in any country of the world and make 2 or more policy recommendations for how the implementation can be improved. Okay, that sounds complicated. Let's break it up. You can choose any country. So if you're from China or you're from any country in the world, you can choose your own country. You can choose Australia if you want, even if you're from overseas, but you don't have to. So it's deliberately, I want it to be really relevant to your career. So I'd actually prefer it if you did your own country, because then, if you're planning to go home, the research has direct relevance to what you're doing in the future. You're evaluating the effectiveness. Again, I'll talk more about that this afternoon in the workshop, but basically, how is it working? And the second part is really important. Make 2 or more policy recommendations for how it can be improved. I emphasised before, it's really easy to see problems. It's much harder to come up with realistic and practical solutions. And that second part, don't underestimate how hard it is, because that's what takes your research from just being a description about the problem to actually being a positive contribution to solutions. So postgrads have 3,000 to 4,000 words. Undergrads have 2,000 to 3,000 words. I'm not stressed about the word limit. I have to give you a word limit because the university wants everyone to know, what fairly you're being judged against. But if you were to write 6,000 words, you're not going to lose marks. I'm sure in lots of courses you would, but I really want you to choose, you write what you think needs to be written. You're judged against essentially what can be reasonably expected in that word limit, but don't be stressed about being under or over. Okay, there's a range of marking criteria, including the significance, the rigour, depth and coherence of the methodology and analysis. The third one's particularly important, the utility of the recommendations made. So for a 7, you've got highly practical and useful recommendations for improving policy that are clear, succinct, synthesised with and justified by the evidence presented and show real insight into the issues studied. And that is, I'd suggest, probably the major challenge, that criteria for your research. I really want you to think about good policy recommendations. Does that make sense? And then there's quality of language and use of graphics. So go wild with pictures and maps. Cool. Can I come back to that this afternoon when we talk about research design? So those things. There's examples of past research papers available on the Blackboard site. So you can see here's a cover of a student from a few years ago who was looking at a wetland in Tanzania and the implementation of the Ramsar Convention. So I expect that Ramsar Convention will be really popular with many people. Climate change will also be really popular. World Heritage will be really popular. You choose a convention that you're really interested in and look at typically a case study of a particular site within your country will be a great way to bring in empirical data and say something meaningful based on evidence, which is meeting then the research criteria. You don't have to go out and do primary research. You can just rely upon published literature. But yeah, plenty of examples there. Cool. Okay, and then there's an end of semester. I'll come back again and talk about the research project this afternoon in our workshop. There's an exam at the end. There's quite a bit of information on the Blackboard site and past exams. So there's a student information available already. So what your exam will be, it'll be 2 hours. For undergraduates, you've got Part A, short answer, Part B, medium length answers, and then an essay in Part C. Postgrads have 4 parts, including a Part D, so something that the undergraduates don't have. We'll come up with, I'll find 3 papers during our course, and I'll advise you of them probably after Christmas. And you choose one of those papers, and you have to critically evaluate it. That will be your task. You can go and have a look at some of the past exams if you want to see what that is. But so Part D is an essay. It's about critical analysis, but you'll be told what the question is, and you get to choose one of 3 papers. Cool. Now, there's some criteria and standards which you can see. Can I emphasise that this question is actually on both exams? So this is the Part C question for undergraduates and postgrads. So this question will actually be on your exam this year. It's been on, you'll see when you look at past exams, it's been on the exam, all the past exams as well. So you, for 12 marks, so half an hour to answer this, discuss the development of the major international environmental treaty since 1945 in the context of major historical and political events. Your analysis should explain the major administrative and regulatory frameworks created by the treaties and their historical context in terms of the major political and social events occurring when each treaty was created. What further developments can be expected in the future and why? So that's effectively what we're covering in lectures. You've got half an hour to do it. Also on the exam, you're able to take in 2 pages. So it's not open book, but you can take in 2 pages of notes. So you can have 1 page with all of these major conventions and a few points that you want to cover. Cool. So you already know, in terms of the exam, it's worth 45 marks. 12 marks of it is this question. Cool. Everyone happy with that? And in terms of note taking for lectures, you could mainly base it around, what is the summary of each convention? Because in half an hour you won't be able to cover a lot. It'll be, a paragraph or 2 on each convention. It's not a lot. So you can boil down your notes to that. Okay, that's our first lecture. We've done a broad brush introduction, talk about who am I, who are you, been through the course profile. Can I finish with 3 take-home points? Firstly, protecting the environment in international environmental regulation is not anti-jobs, anti-human, anti-wealth, etc. Protecting the environment, good governance, justice and education are foundations for achieving a good society and all of society's goals, including jobs, public health, happiness. And this course is about empowering you with an understanding of the major international environmental frameworks so that you can contribute to good governance wherever your career takes you. And the major practical skills that this course aims to give you are improved research and policy analysis. It's a big focus. And I've got, I mentioned to Dr. Carol Booth is coming on as one of the assistants for the field trip. She's doing the primary marking for your research papers. She's got a couple of PhDs, one in environmental philosophy. I used to, when I did my PhD as an editor to help me write my PhD. I think she's fantastic. And so she'll be looking at all of your research papers and giving you hopefully some really good detailed feedback on your writing, your thinking, and then I'll review her feedback and also talk particularly about your policy recommendations. So hoping to give you some really good feedback on your research. Cool. Okay, further reading from this lecture. Have a look at the Blackboard site. You can have a look at those couple of textbooks, but I'd emphasise it's really the websites where you get the bulk of information. There's a book that I wrote based on my PhD, 2010, Does Environmental Law Work?, which it's free to download. It's available in PDF. It might be a useful reference for your research paper. So my PhD was on how to evaluate effectiveness of environmental legal systems. Your research topic is on evaluating the effectiveness of an environmental legal system and making policy recommendations. So I didn't just choose your topic because it's something that I've studied. I actually chose it because I think it's really valuable for you to think about evaluation. It's a really valuable research skill. So it's not the importance for you is the primary reason why I chose the research topic, not because it's just because I think it's important. Okay, and you can download the research design template from the Blackboard site and start thinking about the research topic as well. So we'll talk more about that in this afternoon's workshop.